It's so great to be back with all of you again on the Elevate main stage. I can't believe it's been a year since we last got together. You know, Elevate is that special time of year where the whole community comes together to celebrate, to connect, to collaborate during Canada's Tech Week. You know, many of you know the founding story of Elevate, of how the leaders of the innovation ecosystem teamed up with Mayor John Tory to create Elevate in 95 days. And over the next 95 days, 95 partners joined us to create Canada's Tech Week. But what many of you don't know is the untold story of how Elevate almost never happens. I'm going to take you back to the Sunday 2 days before the main stage. My coach, Andrea, and I were doing the final touches on my keynotes, and my very pregnant wife, Carrie, comes out and says, "I think I'm going into labor. We need to go to the hospital now." And so, without a moment's delay, Andrea jumps in her car, takes us to Mount Sinai Hospital, where we are admitted and spending some time. Fortunately, it was a false call. We got to go home that day, and it all was good. I was a little concerned because we were 6 weeks early. We come back to the Sony Center the next day, and the Elevate Elves are working around the clock. They're creating this amazing experience for all of our guests. And at about 1 o'clock, just before dress rehearsals, the power goes out. And not just in the Sony Center, but on the entire block. We haven't had dress rehearsal, we haven't set up, but there's not much we can do. I guess we're done. We go home, and I get a call later on that night, and we learn that the power is back on, the show must go on, and we come to the inaugural Elevate. We had a fantastic week, and 3 days after Elevate, Carrie gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She was healthy, and we named her Ellie after Elevate. I'm just kidding. We named her Aria. My wife's not crazy. And Aria was born in a time of such transformative change. You know, when you look back at the last 200,000 years that modern Homo sapiens have been walking the planet, and you take the last 200 years, I mean a fraction of 1%, we've seen more change in those past 200 years than we have in all of that period of time combined. It really was the dawn of the first industrial revolution, where men and women had harnessed the power of water and steam to create locomotion and to create the steam engine, which allowed us to travel great distance. We literally had a whole new world. On the dawn of the second industrial revolution, we harnessed electricity power, we had a 24-hour workday, and we moved into cities, which created mass urbanization and industrialization. About 150 years later, we harnessed and invented computing power, which automated a number of our tasks, and it was the birth of the tech industry. Fast forward to 2016, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the leaders of our globe declared the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution, which is known as cyber physical systems. And it is unprecedented to unlike any of the revolutions before it. You see, we've never had so many exponential technologies happening at the same time. Artificial intelligence, regenerative medicine, quantum computing, just to name a few, are all growing at an unprecedented rate. We have no idea of the impacts and changes that we're about to experience. It'll change every system, every structure, and even us as human beings will be transformed. And so I ask you, at the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution, do we want to be creators or do we want to be consumers? And so I think about Canada's role in the fourth industrial revolution. I think about how we can be bold and lead the world. And we have 3 action items that I think we must embark on. First, values-driven leadership. Next, we must increase our investment in innovation. And third, we must have the courage to be bold. Let's start with the first, values-driven leadership. After last year's festival, we got to travel the world and meet with other leaders that were building scalable global tech events. And what was nice is that when we met up with them around the world and they learned that we were Canadian, everyone was so nice to us. We talked about how respected Canadian values were globally. We talked about Canada's leadership role in artificial intelligence. And we talked about how dreamy our Prime Minister is. And so that intrigued me, and so I wanted to learn more about what are the values that we've identified. And there was this great research project that our friends at the University of Waterloo. They had identified what Canadian values unite all of us, what connects us as a society. And when I saw the list, many of them resonate with us at Elevate. Inclusiveness, diversity, equality. And when you think about the fourth industrial revolution, it's not just who builds the technology that matters, because the creators of the technology unbiasedly put their own value set into the product. And so when you think about who's leading, who has a seat at the table today, you can't help but look at the US, the world's largest economy, or China, the world's most populous nation, as having an impact on shaping the value set of the world through the fourth industrial revolution. So let's talk about the US. The US is a capitalistic economy, right? In the US, healthcare is a very large business. And when profit is your primary motivator, those biases get built into the medical technologies that they create. And so I'll give you an example. Imagine a life-saving organ was made available, and the AI is going through to see who is the best match. Well, in Canada, we may allocate that based on need. But when profit is the primary motivator, you allocate that life-saving organ to who has the greatest ability to pay. AI today is shaping and deciding whether your kids will get into university, whether or not you will qualify for the mortgage to buy your dream home. Life's most important decisions are going to be shaped. And do we want a capitalistic mindset, or do we want Canadian values to determine how our society will be governed? Let's look at China. China is an authoritarian society. It has a communist government that consumes over 50% of the world's cameras. It's a surveillance state. And when products are built in China, as one of their most successful companies, Huawei has demonstrated, Huawei is the global leader in 5G technology, an essential technology to drive the fourth industrial revolution. Well, it's mandated by the Chinese government that they have a back door into accessing whatever data they believe is essential for national security. And that not only doesn't apply within China, it applies anywhere in the world that Huawei is deployed. And that's why the US and Australia have banned that. So if you're a Huawei customer, as we are in Canada, the Chinese government literally has the keys to a back door to go into your phone and pull out whatever data they deem necessary. And so again, in a society that is built on surveillance, and privacy is not an issue because Big Brother is always watching. The creators of the technology in the fourth industrial revolution will shape the outcomes. And so whether that's providing the world's best healthcare or the privacy that all of our citizens deserve, I ask you, do we want to be creators or do we want to be consumers? Next, I want to talk about Canada and our investment track record in innovation. What can we do to lead amongst these two superpowers? Well, the good news is, in the fourth industrial revolution, size doesn't matter. But our investment in innovation really does. Let me tell you my own personal story. While building Achievers, we were at a stage where we required a large investment to continue to grow globally. At the time, 2010, you had no choice but to go to Sand Hill Road and get a US investor for that next stage of growth. Well, I'm so happy to report today that Ritual, homegrown Ritual, had a next-gen financing moment when they secured $90 million in an all-Canadian round of venture capital to get their next round of growth. Isn't that amazing? A big round of applause for Ritual. Incredible. Incredible. There's never been a better time to build, to start, to scale your company right here in Canada. There's no need to leave. Actually, when you look at the entire venture industry in Canada, we're having a record year. In 2001, according to CB Insights, Canadian startups received $1.3 billion in financing. That's up 50% year over year. But when you take into the investment of our entire ecosystem, and you factor in corporate Canada, and you factor in the Canadian government, that's where Canada is starting to fall behind. In 2001, our investment in innovation as a percentage of GDP peaked at just over 2%. And then the dot-com crash happened, and Canada never recovered. We chose to continue to divest in innovation every single year. And what happened to the rest of the world during that same period of time? They increased, the most industrialized countries in the world increased their investment in innovation to be 2.4% by 2014. It's pretty startling, that gap. And so I'm like, well, let's look a little deeper into the numbers. There's got to be more to this story. And so we dug a little deeper, and we looked at the most innovative companies according to the Bloomberg Innovation Index. And it was clear that countries fell into one of three categories: keeners, leaders, and laggards. Let's talk about the keeners. The keeners have been investing 4.3% of their GDP into R&D. This is 2014 numbers. And you can see, these are not large countries, right? The one's a little bigger, one's a little smaller than Canada. And as I said, in the fourth industrial revolution, size doesn't matter, but the investment in innovation does. Because 4 years later, when Bloomberg looked at the most innovative countries in the world and who had the greatest, where did innovation have the greatest impact on their economy, it wasn't surprising to see that Israel and South Korea ranked number 1 and number 2. It paid off in 4 short years. Now let's look at the leaders. The next wave, Sweden, Japan, Austria, all countries that we could identify with have a similar size and value set as Canada. What they're doing, though, is they're investing 3% of their GDP into R&D, almost 2 times the next group, the laggards, where you have Canada and Saudi Arabia. What's sad to see is that not only is Canada in the laggards list, but we are dropping. We are no longer in the top 20, which means when the world's leaders get together to shape the technologies that are driving the fourth industrial revolution, and they invite the top 20 countries, Canada doesn't get a seat at the table. When I think about Saudi Arabia and their world's largest oil fields and what they're doing, they are aware that in the fourth industrial revolution, with the rapidly dropping price of solar, that oil field is no longer going to be their biggest asset. They are diversifying into tourism, into financial services, into real estate, and to even tech investing. This past year, Saudi Arabia teamed up with number 3 Japan to create the $100 billion Vision Fund. They've got the capital ready to deploy to take advantage of the technologies that will be shaping the fourth industrial revolution. And do you know what their first investment was? They're building the world's largest solar field. They are literally burying their oil reserves with solar panels across the desert. They're getting ready. And so when I think about our ability to compete, the average check size to one company in the Vision Fund is larger than the largest Canadian VC firm. And so what do we have working for us? Where are the opportunities in Canada? Well, we've been investing in artificial intelligence since the 80s. We are clearly the global research in the research and development phase, and now we are in the phase of commercialization. We've got an amazing pool of talent, researchers, and we're the fastest growing tech market in North America. But the one thing we're missing is that investment in innovation. So Minister Baines, the CEOs, the corporate CEOs in this room, I'm asking you, I'm requiring you, when you set your 2019 budgets, double your investment in innovation. Because I ask you, do you want to be creators or do you want to be consumers? And so when I think about the steps, the actions required, I know that it's going to take courage. I know that we need to be bold and not take the safe path. And I'm asking us to look back at a time when Canada led the world. In the 1960s, Tommy Douglas, the then Premier of Saskatchewan, had a passion for providing national health care to every citizen. And yes, it was complex. And yes, it was expensive, and it was hard to do, but he persevered. And I think that we can all agree that having universal health care is a source of Canadian pride. And we're glad that he was successful. Well, as we enter the fourth industrial revolution, I know that in doubling down our investment in innovation is going to take a lot of work. It's going to be hard. It's going to be complex. It's going to be a difficult thing for us to do, but I ask our leaders not to take the safe path. We need to make big bets and have moonshots because we have the choice of being creators or being consumers. And so, as you spend the next 3 days at Elevate and gain all sorts of new knowledge and insight, I'm asking you to join me in helping create a Canada that our kids can be proud of. Thank you.